Hey guys, welcome back to the Results Junkies podcast. This is part 2 of our rambling discussion on AI and how it impacts founders and investors. And we spent a bunch of time talking about founders. I got a couple questions for Paul on the investor side of things, and then we may try to wander into this other YouTube article that he and I both took a look at this week that talks about removal of AI-generated content. A little bit of housekeeping. Show at resultsjunkies.com is how you find us. Emails, comments, questions, all that good stuff.
Heckling.
He's at Paul.
Lots of heckling would be good.
Heckling's great. At Paul Singh on all those social media channels, including Threads, maybe, but that's probably a discussion for another day. and at Pizza in Motion for me. So if you didn't listen to part 1, we talked about this article, which we'll put in the show notes. Figma had this tool that they rolled out. Figma had this tool that they rolled out that helps folks develop their own apps using graphical interfaces by typing essentially written prompts, and then the system will build, layouts for them. And the system was building essentially copies of the Apple Weather app, even though Figma has said they did not train their model on that app. So it raised a bunch of problems that we talked about for founders. Now let's flip around the investor side. You were just saying this at the close of the last episode, Paul. You said, maybe this is why neither one of us invested in blockchain. And so, there's this, there's this open question that I keep coming back to. I don't want to miss out on the big companies in AI that are going to be, massive successes. And not because it's AI, but because it's such a big chunk of the world that we're investing in right now. You and I have talked about how we think that big companies are most likely going to be most of the winners here. And so we're trying to find, small companies amongst this, needle in a haystack sort of philosophy. But I mean, maybe this isn't a question. Maybe it's more of a statement first, and we'll see if we can glean a question out of it. But I consistently find myself looking at these models, and the more that companies are built on using some AI tool, the less comfortable I am in investing because the landscape is so unclear. And so I do find myself asking questions of folks where it's interesting. I think, years ago when we would have products that were, kludged together, it was the first version of something and it was an ugly MVP and they were using some technology to do separate pieces of it. I didn't think much about it. And we invested in lots of companies like that. But if somebody came to me now and said, yeah, I've got this engine and I had such and such tool build me my interface, and then I'm getting my data from ChatGPT, I don't think I could write a check into that right now because I just don't know what the potential regulatory risk or legal risk is for something like that.
Okay, so that was a statement. Unless I missed the question, right?
No, that was a statement. So let's start with a statement and we'll see if we can glean a question out of it. So first, that's my statement. I'm curious to hear where your thoughts are on that.
Well, okay, shooting from the hip here, I think two things. First of all, and I'll just speak for myself, and then you can confirm or deny whether you feel the same way. First of all, any founder that comes to me and talks about the technology or the product or any of that stuff for more than 50% of the meeting is probably not going to get a check, because as an early stage investor, what we're really trying to do is invest in the growth of the company. And as a general rule of thumb, if a founder can't demonstrate that to me, that's not interesting to me. So that would be part number 1 here, is that any founder that overly focuses on the tool rather than the mutual outcome we're seeking here, that's sort of a big red flag for me. So secondly, in our closing documents, if you just use off-the-shelf paperwork, it doesn't matter, 500 KISS, Series Seed. I mean, even if your attorney drafts something up, they almost always include some sort of broad language that says you are going to take all reasonable steps to keep your data secure, make sure that you're using the right licenses for software and all that stuff. And so I guess I wouldn't be afraid, as long as they pass my first filter, that they're thinking about the growth. I don't think I would not invest just because they're using, AI or something like that in there. But I would want to make sure that they understand the implications of it and make sure that they understand that they do need to keep an eye on it. So for example, I'll just use Strata as an example. One of the big reasons I don't want to really get into a big AI strategy commitment just yet is because we're talking about patient data, and it's until there is bulletproof liability clear, sorry, if as long until liability and where that starts and stops is ultra clear, and until I know without a doubt how my data is going to be treated and what to do and how to prove that it wasn't used in training models. Until those things are all those boxes are checked, I can't let the PHI or the personal health information leave my custody. And so maybe the other way to say it is like I got to keep it all on premise, and that's going to require engineers and expensive GPUs and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I don't know. I guess what I'm just trying to say is, for my second point is I don't think I would walk away from the deal just because they were using AI, as long as they understand that that there are risks there, and they need to actually kind of proactively manage those risks. One of the guys I was talking to earlier on a topic like this, he made a really interesting comment. He's not an engineer. This was a business guy.
Yeah.
And we were talking about AI strategy and stuff like that. And it was interesting how so I won't recap that whole thing, but he said something like, well, just double the cyber insurance policy. He said it so matter-of-factly. And I was like, huh, that's could be a way to like hedge the risk here a little bit.
See, here's why I have a problem with that, because it's, we don't know it's not just that you're going to get sued. When I say regulatory risk, and I do think there's also execution risk too, but just on the regulatory risk side of things, it's like, if you're relying on, we'll pick on ChatGPT, but if you're relying on ChatGPT for your model and some sort of regulatory risk comes down, and it sort of dovetails into this YouTube story that we'll get into in just a minute, and something comes down and ChatGPT is now ordered to strip something out of their model. I mean, think about it like this way. At some point, the FCC ruled that cell phone companies had to figure out how to keep robocallers from texting you about political campaigns. And so like they had to build the system for that, and there were monitors and there were fines and there were all that stuff. So if some law, even ill-intended law, gets passed that changes that model, if the underlying company is too reliant on that model to grow, then that could have a pretty significant issue on their ability to function. Yeah. And I think like hand in hand with that executional risk, we've talked a little bit about this on the show, I think at one point, but you know that I have this Slack community attached to my travel podcast. And so I won't pretend to remember how much it is per month, but ChatGPT charges whatever, $20 a month, $50 a month, but some like nominal sum to access their database. And even if you added a zero or a couple of zeros to that number, they're all numbers that I could get behind if one of our startups was paying for data, and they were paying $20 or $200 or $2,000 or maybe even $20,000 a month for data. But this also sort of, because we're in such a nascent stage of how these models are working and how they're monetizing, this sort of comes back to, remember when Elon first took over Twitter and he said he was going to change the fee to access the API, and it went from, essentially free to like, whatever, $15,000 a month for some people. And they're like, well, we just can't survive on it, so we're not going to write to that API anymore. I do have that concern. And we have a company in our portfolio, I'll anonymize a little bit, but they're in sort of this lane of having access to these sorts of data warehouses is probably the wrong way to say it, but these language models, that's probably anonymized enough. But if something were to change there, I do think their business goes away overnight. And so I do have to assign some level of risk to that company. And while I may think they can exit for, I'm making numbers up, if I think they can exit for $1 billion, but I think there's a 20% chance that bad legislation is going to get passed and take them to zero, then I have to figure that I have to factor that into my equations for that company.
I can agree with that. I think what you're describing is platform risk. And yeah, absolutely. If there is a significant amount of platform risk, I would totally walk as well.
I do think there is a significant amount of platform risk today, but I don't know how to calculate it. It's like to be clear, it could be 2%, it could be 20%. Those are two very different numbers. It's really hard to tell what the chances are that like Congress, this might be a little bit editorializing, but like, what are the chances that Congress passes a really stupid law about AI in the next 2 years? I mean, it's not 0%.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I'm sure there'll be something around this. But let me give you maybe two totally off the wall extreme examples here just to make the point. I think if I was looking at a particular possible investment and I just was like, made a remark of like, wow, you guys are developing a lot with a tiny little team, And they said, yeah, we're using Microsoft Copilot, or I'm sorry, GitHub Copilot with our
Mm-hmm.
engineering team, and they're able to just crank out more faster. That to me, sort of an acceptable risk because that's the tool. And if something goes wrong or the tool goes away, it'll certainly like, change the output of like what they're building and stuff like that. But ultimately, that's very different than if somebody said, "Hey, I'm using these AI models to do algorithmic trading and stuff like that." And it's like that's AI is like now the core part of the business and controlling like a lot more of the outcome, and the platform risk is significantly higher. The
Yeah.
regulatory risk is significantly higher. That would be like a no-go for me. Those are probably not the best examples, but I just want to try to paint a picture of like, loosely where that line is in the sand, which is if it just so happens that you're using a tool to drive productivity that happens to be powered by AI, I treat that as a lower level of platform risk than somebody using AI tools or whatever as part of their primary. It would be like, sorry, one more example here. Let's just use the attorney Rob. Poor Rob, he's not here to defend himself or whatever, but we're we're paying for Rob's expertise because Rob is the core product,
Right.
right? Now, whether he uses AI or not behind the scenes, I don't know if he is. I don't know if he isn't. And by the way, it doesn't matter if he is. The
I
point
hope
is, though, is
not.
that like, well, look, he could be using, and poor Rob, he's not here to defend himself, but I wouldn't be surprised if more attorneys like him, feed a draft document into a chat GPT like model and say, tell me what the key bullet points are here. Now, where I would have a problem with it is if he just then copy paste that right back into the email, because now it's not Rob's expertise.
Well, yeah, it's funny because I read an article recently that talked about how Amazon is, and you might have been one of the ones you sent me, but just about Amazon using, no, I don't think you sent it to me, but it was Amazon using more AI to read through contracts and look for troublesome clauses. And it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, that, man, I would not want to use a lawyer that did that and then didn't read the base document, but that's a completely separate discussion.
Well, are you familiar with? Oh, well, you probably are. You've been through your fair amount of lawsuits, like I have too. But legal discovery used to be just a bunch of paralegals reviewing. So let me step back for people that don't know this. Oftentimes, when you're in a corporate dispute of some sort, one of the necessary steps is what's called discovery, which means that both parties now have to like provide the other party with a bunch of evidence to get ready for a trial or whatever. One of the common practices is that you overload them with information. So they want to know what the chat history was between these two people. Well, you dump all the chats. And in the old days, that was just actually like, pallets of paper. They were basically trying to bleed you out because you'd have to pay an army of paralegals to read this. So, and humans make mistakes. Humans are tired. Humans stop for coffee and then restart the work, but maybe skipped 3 pages accidentally. All right. Well, what was the next thing? Well, I think when optical character recognition became open source, what happened? Well, now let's take all that paper, that pallet full of paper, let's run it through a scanner, like a PDF scanner, and now let's apply optical character recognition. And instead of needing, let's say, 100 paralegals, now I really only need 10 because now we can use a find. Like you load those PDFs, you type in some keywords. Much more efficient, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think like I don't have an issue with that. It's more when like the example that Amazon was using was that they were like the model was being trained to flag clauses in contracts and things like that. To your point of searching for keywords, I have less of an issue with that. But the reality is that I'm not a lawyer, thank God for that. But if I was in this situation, you told me that a model was going to read the contract, I would just find a way to write the clause in a way that hadn't been written before that the model wasn't likely to recognize. It's like you tell me a computer, because a computer's trained by humans. So it's like, all right, we know that legal language has evolved over the years and there are sneakier ways to say things, terms and conditions, all that stuff. It's like, you tell me a robot's going to read my language, great. I will find a way to parse the important clause into 6 different pieces and 6 different paragraphs on 4 different pages to get what I want done. And you haven't told the model to look for that yet because you didn't know to look for that.
That's right. Let me just kind of maybe summarize and say, I think you and I agree. even though I'm doing a
What?
poor job of making my point. I think you
What?
and I
We
agree.
agree?
We agree. I think we agree that we are uncomfortable with the idea of investing in or paying for high risk things that depend on AI models solely. We would not. I don't like that. You don't like that. I don't like that.
That heavily rely on it. And I think I would
But
be more inclined to take the risk on the B2C side than I would be on the B2B side in that, and then maybe it's just a very shallow way of thinking about it, but I think I would take the chance that I could learn to sell more and different products to customers that trusted me than doing one thing really well for a B2B company and then somebody else figures out how to do it
yeah,
using a
yeah,
faster chip with the latest model from NVIDIA, and then I'm out of business.
yeah. And I'll say it again. We agree. You and I agree. And all I'm just trying to say is that I'm cool with it being used as a productivity enhancer, maybe a research tool, something supporting, some other function. Supporting it is the key, not holding it
Right.
up itself
Right.
and all that. But
It's a
I'm
fine line.
not comfortable with the idea of it being, core to the actual product or the product. So
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that. I'll see if I can find an Amazon article so you can see if you can interpret it as I did, because it seemed like they were using it very, very broadly. But before we run out of time, let's see if we can peel back the layers a little bit on this YouTube story, because I think it's a very interesting first step, and I would actually say it's pretty progressive for all the stuff that I've read so far. But I'm curious on your opinion on this. So essentially, what YouTube rolled out is a policy and an actual process to request removal of AI generated content that you find objectionable. So in this case, it's AI generated content of you. So let's just say that somebody who's a big roller like Paul Singh says that somebody has put a video out about you that has you saying things you don't agree with. Again, not trying to get overly political. Let's just say that they were going to tell you that glazed donuts are better than chocolate donuts. We'll just talk about something very near and dear to my heart. And you think this is blasphemous. How could anybody ever say that Paul Singh likes glazed donuts? So YouTube has created this process where you would file a request, and the only piece that wasn't really clear from the article is like how you prove you're you. So like how do you say, hey, I want this removed? I'm the real Paul Singh. So I do think there is a step there that I just haven't figured out how they're implementing yet.
Yep.
But then when that happens, you complain to me about putting your likeness on my podcast without your permission because I used an AI tool to generate it. They give me 48 hours to remove that. And if I don't remove it, then they begin an investigation. Now, the only downside to this, which I understand would be incredibly hard to figure it out past this, but the only downside is once they do their investigation, they're going to act on that investigation, and there doesn't seem to be any other human interaction into this, nor could there be given the vast amount of video there is on YouTube. I'm curious how this struck you when you read it.
I think it's about time. Well, actually, let me rephrase. I think it's inevitable that we're going to have legislation about this, at some point. I don't know. It's probably not during an election year right now, but I suspect because of a lot of the deep fakes that are likely going to happen over the next couple months, on the bigger elections happening, in combination with some of the stuff that seems to be happening in the adult industry where, people are creating deep fake adult videos of celebrities and stuff like that. The combination of those two things, I think, is going to force this into a larger conversation, I would think, within the next 18 months or so. But this, what YouTube's doing, I think, that proactively is not only good, but I also think it's probably going to allow for a lot of these edge cases and gotchas to get exposed so that when the legislation is written, maybe it's got a little bit more real world experience. Like, are there trolls that are just pretending to be me? And it turns out that it's hard for me to take those down. Well, that will probably be taken into consideration when the legislation's written. So I think it's kind of cool that they did this in advance, but let's also, be clear. They're not doing it because they're saints. They're doing it because they also got to protect their platform. The last thing you want to do is be named in a party to a suit because you didn't do anything and now my likeness is everywhere. So I think this is good, and I think it's going to be a step towards what will ultimately become the legislation. Instagram, I don't think has rolled something out like this yet. None of the other social platforms have yet.
Yeah. No, and I think I think the advantage to being out in front of it here is, at least from YouTube's standpoint, is by offering some sort of a path for users to, I won't say get rid of this stuff, because obviously we need to figure out how effective the process is going to be. But it would be hard for people now to construe YouTube as being tone deaf to the dangers of AI generative tools to misrepresent somebody's positions. Do they have it right? Do they have it perfect? No, I'm sure they won't. But it's like, there was an article recently in the Wall Street Journal about how I was really surprised by this. And maybe I shouldn't have been. Maybe it's just like what all the news has inundated us with. But to be clear, it's not the first part that I was surprised by. So essentially, there's a Wall Street Journal article where they opened up new Instagram accounts where they posed as 13-year-olds. And without liking anything or following anyone, within minutes, they were able to get their feed completely filled with porn, including some pretty graphic sexual content. And there was a professor at some university that was able to replicate the same thing. And they did this over and over again, creating accounts. And all they did was, if the video showed a comedy routine or a muscle car or whatever, they just flipped past the video. And if it showed any sort of a woman doing something suggestive in the video, they stopped and they watched the video. And the model trained itself in minutes on this. And all of a sudden, it was all like female adult performers and their sexual acts and the whole thing. Yep. The interesting thing was, this is the part that surprised me. They did the exact same thing with TikTok, and they couldn't get TikTok to do it.
Huh.
And it's like, wow, okay, that's interesting.
Say that again. They could not
they did the same thing with TikTok, created brand new accounts posing as 13-year-olds, and TikTok would not show adult content to the 13-year-olds' accounts. And of course, we think about TikTok as this big bad company that the Chinese are spying on us, and they could be doing all of those things. But but in this one instance, it was clear that the tactic taken by TikTok was more effective at controlling this than Instagram was. And so I do think there is, to some degree, a halo effect for YouTube to say, we're going to be out in front of this. We're probably going to get some stuff wrong, but we're going to try to wrap our arms around the responsibility we have to protect people against fake information.
Right. Yeah. I don't disagree. Also, that still got me surprised by the fact that the example you just used where it wasn't being shown at all. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. This next 18 months is going to be really fascinating. The combination of the election and sort of these, celebrities getting deep faked and stuff like that. It's going to force the conversation to happen, and we'll see where it goes. But I will also say, you said something when you were setting this part of the conversation up, you said something like, well, how do you prove it's you? I mean, I think the generally accepted way to prove that is an ID. I remember when Dana's Facebook account got hacked or something like that, there was a process by which you had to upload your driver's license to prove to them that you are who you say you are. But then you also sort of signed a couple electronic agreements that, verified it. And so it's very similar like the DMCA takedown stuff as well. If somebody plagiarizes your content on the web, you have, under the DMCA, you have a certain accepted process to self-certify that you are, doing this all in good faith and da-da-da. And so there's a whole legal precedent around that. And I think YouTube taking the first step here is probably mostly a selfish act that they're doing, just to say, just to do it.
Yeah.
But I wonder if other platforms will now follow suit quickly, the Instagrams of the world and Facebook and stuff like that. I wonder if they'll follow suit quickly as well.
I want to take you down one more rabbit hole just because you talked about the ID thing. And so, clearly not related to founders and stuff like that, but I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal or the Times, one of the papers recently, the last 48 hours. It was about a Supreme Court decision. It was interesting. So, you noted, hey, I used my ID to prove to someone who I was, my government issued ID, right? That's a fairly common thing. And I'll be honest, I don't think I've thought twice about that very often. So there was apparently a lawsuit in Texas that was filed saying that, I guess in Texas, and I'm not going to get all the details right because I only read a brief summary of the case that the Supreme Court passed judgment on. The Texas passed a law that said, if you want to see porn online, you have to prove that you're over the age of 18. And the way to do that was, you had to show them your ID, and they had to verify your ID. And what was interesting to me, and the Supreme Court seemed to side with the plaintiffs here, I never thought about this concept of this. It's like, all right, well, but if you're required to do that, they said that it was an infringement of your First Amendment rights. I'm like, well, how the heck could this be an infringement of First Amendment rights? And the way they got there was saying, well, don't you have a right to not have the government know what type of porn you watch. And I started laughing. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I guess so. But if this company has to prove that I was 18, then they also have to, like, they also have records of my account and what I've watched and stuff like that. And so, like, if I use my government ID to get access to porn in Texas, does that mean the Texas state authorities can now subpoena that company to find out what porn I watch? And I'm like, holy cow, like just uploading an ID opens up a Pandora's box I never really thought about.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, first of all, you know a lot about the legalities around adult movies. That's incredible.
You're welcome.
Don't know how Michelle feels about that, but hey. Also, now I'm going to put a FOIA request into Texas and see what you've been up to.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. But, I mean, look, I think this is probably like too much inside baseball for most people, but just in the context of founders building businesses and investors understanding the risk that we're getting in, the risk we need to all be prepared to handle. I think, I don't know, the fact that, like, for example, you and I, or I'll just speak for myself, the fact that I can't even clearly articulate why I'm so uncomfortable with this technology yet, I think maybe is the more important meta point here, is that it's not really clear. And it makes me wonder whether the representations and warranties that we put into our default paperwork is enough.
I would argue it's not, but I'd also argue I'm not sure what you could put in today based on how uncertain the landscape is. So I think, at least at the outset, part of what we're trying to figure out is how much risk we're possibly leaving ourselves open to. Because I don't know how you could write this in a way today to protect yourself enough, because we just don't know what the future looks like, and we can't just stop writing checks. Yeah. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck, founders. You have to convince us of all this stuff.
Yeah, as if it wasn't hard enough already.
Yeah,
but
right.
Yeah, I mean, again, summary on my
just explain AI to us. It's all good.
I think it only took us a couple hundred episodes, it feels like, before we finally agreed on something. And that is that we're okay, I think, from the investor standpoint, if the usage of AI is in a supporting fashion, productivity gains, things like that. Where we get a little nervous, or maybe a lot nervous, is when it's so tightly wound into the product that you sell that you've introduced a major platform risk that might break the deal down. So finally, we agree on something. We should just end the podcast here.
There you go. It only took about 150 episodes, but here we are, agreeing as we get ready to hit the button and end this 2-part episode. I
was gonna say, like, when this particular episode comes out, I think you will be wandering around Japan. I think so.
I think when this comes out, I'll be in Kyoto or Tokyo. Yeah, and a shock of shocks, I will have already been to another Disney park that I've ever been to, Tokyo Disney. So,
I love it, man. Well, safe travels, and I'm sorry for rambling so much today, but we agree on something.
TLDR, after almost an hour in a 2-part episode, Paul and I agree. Take it to the bank.